Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. Today, we've got a really interesting guest and near and dear to my heart because I'm a B2B SaaS founder myself. And Scott Edmonds is the CRO of Syncari. And you're also involved with VCs, and you are a coach to the sales and the growth and of the startups that are inside of those portfolios. So I think you said you not only play a CRO on TV, you are a CRO. You founded the company, Syncari. You've been doing that the last 5 years, but you play an active role in a lot of other startups in ensuring their growth and their success from an early stage. But you've also got some enterprise experience in your portfolio too. So what we're going to be talking about here today, I think there's a lot of wisdom that we're going to get ready with pen and paper or on our iPad or whatever it is. But I'd like to, before we get started on kind of our subject, is what does it take to be a successful early stage CRO? Maybe expand a little bit on the background that I just kind of touched on there before we get started.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I've been looking forward to this for weeks now. As you noted, I'm drawn to early stage startups for a bunch of reasons. I think having some good positive experiences at some really helps that. But if we're working on a startup, there's a bit of, I think Jason Lemkin calls it the pirate or the romantic, right? You're looking for something to do something differently. And that's why, whether you're an engineer or a marketer or a salesperson or anything, why you want to go do a startup. I've had the good fortune to be part of some very, very cool teams working on some cool products. And that's what I'm doing here today. Syncari is actually came about as an idea from I'd worked with the founding team here at one of my previous companies that I worked at early stage, which was Marketo, convincing the world that marketing automation was a thing. And it turned out to be a thing. And it did turn into some pretty bona fide enterprise experience as a result of that.
Well, I'm fascinated by the background, but I'm also kind of like the analogy you gave here. You're passionate, being a founder myself. I have a heart for these companies that have grand visions, right? And that we're going to change the world. So when you're coming into a company for the first time, you're taking a look at it, and you're going to come in as the coach or the consultant, however you want to, form that relationship. What is it that you're thinking of? When you first come in, you're going to evaluate, okay, where are you guys? So I understand what then we need to do. Tell us kind of your mindset when you go into a new early stage startup and how you start working with them.
I think you have to just believe in the mission. To me, it's probably the most important thing. Is this something that I want to work on for the next 4 years? And it's going to be very, very freaking hard, right? So you have to love the mission, I think, first and foremost. If it feels like this is going to be an easy thing, or we're going to get purchased and make some money or something like this, that's probably not the right reason to do it. But like, do you really believe that this is going to be something that is going to be transformative and that's something that you want to go sell? I think that's an important thing. I am a sales guy, right? So do I think I can sell this? And that's an important thing. I've tried this before. I know this buyer persona or advisor invested in a company that worked on this persona. Here's the things where I think this is going to be hard. Love the mission, but man, I don't think that I'm going to be able to be successful at this. You really have to believe that you personally can be out there. Because titles aside, all of us, CEO, CRO, whatever, we're all salespeople when you really get down to it. Can I attract people to my mission, and can I convince them to trust me, and can I make them happy that they did? If we could do those things in a repetitive way, then it gets very, very, very interesting. I think it's at a coda to that, right? So do I believe in the mission? Do I believe that I personally could go attract and acquire and retain customers? And two is like back to the stretch here. I don't think anybody should go into a startup thinking, oh, I'm going to do this for a year or two. I think you really want to think like, can I do this for 4 or 5 years minimum, and ideally longer? But like, it's going to take a lot of bumps and bruises, especially if you're founding or if you're going in very early. There's going to be changes in focus. There's going to be changes in messaging. There's going to be changes in the market. And you don't want to jump out too early from those things if you really, again, truly believe in the mission. The coda that I mentioned is like, do you really want to work with the people that you are talking to on the executive team or the founding team or your boss for the next 4 years, expecting that everybody's going to be there? Are these the people that you can communicate well and the same styles and the same values and the same expectations of each other before you do it?
I'm going to flip the question backwards. Two of the most interesting and engaging podcast series we do is Why do B2B CROs fail so quickly? Why do B2B CMOs fail so quickly? We got the shortest tenure in the C-suite. Here's the question I'm going to ask to you. Why do startups fail so quickly? You've been involved in so many of them now. So you've got to go in, and especially with ties to the VC community, right? You invest as a VC, and not everybody in your portfolio is going to give you that 10x, 20x return. So you've got to be going in and saying, I'm looking for some red flags. I'm looking for areas to fix. That's what I do. I'm the fixer. I'm the coach coming in. Nobody takes over a team and just does it the same way that it was already always being taught. So how do you approach this?
I think what you're referencing a little bit there is a little bit outside of what I do at Syncari, but I am invested in a couple of VC funds. I'm not a VC. I think it sounds like a super cool job. You get to work with a bunch of very smart, ambitious, visionary people. But as part of the investor in some of these funds, what I do get to help out with is coaching some early stage shops if they want it. And usually that's working with either the first salesperson there or sometimes the CEO themselves of how is it going? How are you doing with your sales? What is easy? What is hard? What is mysterious? And I try to simplify things. At my core, I think I work pretty hard, but at my heart, I'm also kind of a lazy sales guy. I want to do the least amount of work for the most outcome that I can possibly get. So are we selling to the right customers, or are we selling to the right persona? Is the deployment successful post sale? Is the story easy to understand? All of these things are pretty big ticket things and not a one afternoon chat, but I think it's an iterative process. At Syncari, I think we've experienced many of these things where we're like, oh yeah, that story was a little hard to get, or man, this segment of customers is doing much better than this other segment of customers. Let's focus on there and explore that more and more. But I think at any stage, the entire B2B SaaS landscape has experienced a bunch of really interesting changes over the last 18 months in terms of what they knew to be true to what might be a little bit more currently true. So continuingly to ask ourselves, does my story stick? Am I selling to the right people? Am I selling to the right companies? Am I setting the right expectations pre and post sale?
Yeah, you said a couple of things right there, and I'm going to marry it with something you opened with, which is the most important thing that a CRO can do is you can build the pipeline, you can close deals, and you can retain those customers. The 30 to 40% of all company new revenue should be coming from existing customers. So as a startup, the customers that you bring in are going to be a big predictor of your future growth. So having the right ICP, going after the right audience to bring the right companies in that are the right fit for the company itself so you can actually serve them and grow that business. Now, that's sometimes at odds with the mentality of a startup, which is we got to get sales. We got to get revenue in at all costs. We've got to show that we can actually launch this rocket. So there's a tendency to not tightly define an ICP, but actually let's kind of go broad. Let's not give ourselves too narrow of an opening for success here. Tell me a little bit about your mentality and how you think, you coach, and at Syncari, even though you're 5 years or so old right now, but how do you think about that ICP and how it relates to success?
When you're getting your first 10 customers, yeah, I think you want to have a very open mind. I think you want to have a thesis. That's important. Do we go sell to GE or do we go sell to Series A startup and somewhere in between? And why? What's the thesis on that? We've made a number of changes in our own ICPs over the last 4 or 5 years here at Syncari too. So I think you want to have an open mind if you're getting your first 10 customers, and you want to pay very close attention too of like, is this an expensive customer for me? Is this the kind of customer that sort of matches the model that I think I want to be at my next round of fundraising, be it a Series A or a Series B, et cetera? Because that is our story as we grow, right? Hey, I learned something. We closed these 5 deals in the last 6 months. Here's what's new about it. This is the company that we're going to turn into. And investors need that kind of story to understand what they're investing in, besides just more of what we were doing at Series A and rolled onto. I think it's pretty rare that somebody has the product market fit at Series A and just continues to roll through that straight through Series whatever and gets acquired or goes public. So you're constantly figuring out new stories and ways to service those markets. The other thing too is that like in selling early, finding your first 10 customers, what most investors are looking for, certainly in this B2B SaaS world, is, okay, cool. Did you get people to pay for the product and are they using it? That's an easier task at a smaller company, right? Yes, hey, your problem statement sounds great. You guys seem accomplished. I would love to be a pilot customer for you. That's an easier ask at a smaller company for some obvious reasons. You can be more flexible. You can work on price. You can develop a feature that they want, et cetera. It's a taller ask. And also, let's say my whole thesis was I'm just going to go sell to the Fortune 100, and here's why. Man, there's a lot of requirements that are going to be tricky. There's a lot of bespoke engineering that you're going to have to do. Getting ISO certification might be too tall of an ask for a seed or a Series A startup. So you want to be careful with the kind of requirements that you're committing to, and so on and so forth. So understanding what these customers need and why, but at the end of the day, can I prove that people will pay for my product, and will they use it? Will they get the value that we assume that they're going to get out of it? And will they renew?
So one of the things that you said early on was that, I like to do things simply, right? I like to put in least amount of effort, work for the greatest. So that's not easy. That's smart. That's what we all want to do. In a startup where you're looking for your first 10, first 15 customers, and then you're looking for what are my ideal customers. As a sales team, as a CRO, what that means is you're experimenting with your sales process. You're experimenting with your ICP to a certain extent. That defines somebody that can play in a sandbox that doesn't have as many definitions. I talk to a lot of companies that have extremely tight deadline or focus on their ICP and their sales process, and this is how we do it. You've worked in the enterprise, you've worked in a startup environment. How do you see the difference?
Well, I think you're talking a little bit about ICP, and you're also talking about the sales execution or process. So I think, yeah, it's very important to have a process, or else you have no idea if anything's working. Because the main question is, all right, well, the only thing that's a real black and white thing is, did they sign the contract? Is it a closed loss or a closed won? But rare is the time you have a demo and they want an order and they're going to sign next week. So what are the processes? I think in the early stages, you don't want an incredibly detailed 8-stage process with all kinds of qualifiers. You want something lightweight, but it's got to have crisp exit and entry criteria, or else you just don't know if it's actually working or not. So when we talk to each other as an early stage sales leader or AE, and we're like, great, okay, cool. I see this is at stage 3. That means we know the answers to these 3 things. And if we don't, well, that's a problem, because I can't really measure if my process is working or not. And you're not trying to create work. You're trying to make this as easy on the prospects as you possibly can to buy. But if you get to skip a step or two because the prospect is ready for it and you learned everything in your first call, great. But having a lightweight process that you can then update every 6 to 12 months, I think is really important. If you need to add a step in 12 months, great. But I think understanding the progression from each stage is a very, very, very important part, even though your deal volume and your lead volume might not be big, and it might feel kind of silly to be like, well, I'm only working on 20 opportunities. Why do I need to know these percentages? Is because, again, we're constantly testing assumptions, be it on our ICP or on our process. And are these things measuring out? Right? I'm closing half my deals. Okay, that's great. That's off of 2 deals. So does that mean anything? Well, I don't know yet. I'll know more in 3 months when I've put 30 deals through the process. And if I'm still closing at that process, and where did it tend to stall out? Was it in the discovery phase? Was it in the demo phase? Was it in the negotiation phase? And then I can start to adjust my ICP and my assumptions accordingly.
So I'm going to take a little bit of a right turn here because I want to make sure that we get this subject matter into the podcast. Absolutely agree with everything that you're saying here. One of the biggest differences with a startup is you don't have a built-up brand. You don't have market reputation. You don't necessarily have that trusted advisor status. You got to earn every bit of trust that you're given inside of the sales process. Tell me a little bit about how do you do that? Typically, brand reputation, everything can be that big, lofty, yeah thing, but it can actually take cycles away from the sales process. If a company comes in established and known and is respected in the industry, where you got to build that.
Yeah. And how do you build it? I think some of it goes back to some of the founding team, like, or your cohorts, right? If you are an early stage salesperson without a lot of big company experiences or recognizable brand names, does the CEO have some of that? Does the CMO have some of that? Can he or she be a little bit of the brand builder by reputation? I think when it comes down to it, you have to win on product. Brand experiences come from product experiences in the SaaS world. And so what is your claim? Is that appealing? And can you deliver on that in some time frame that you set expectations on? So a lot of trust is just expectation setting. This is going to take 9 months to do from signing a contract, or this is going to take 9 days to do. in either scenario is acceptable, you have to deliver on that. And then brand experiences start to propagate. You get a case study, you get an enthusiastic customer that you can do a webinar around or something like that. But I think investing in brand for brand's sake is that you have to win with your product and you have to be really confident around that. There's very little things that I think a go-to-market person can do if the product can't deliver on some of these promises that we're all going out there and putting forward. But the other things that are also possible too is a strong partnership at an early stage startup can unlock some brand experiences. Oh, you guys are partnered with such and such, and that means something. I think we all know that some partnerships, because you're in somebody's app directory, that might not indicate that something that is a brand promise, but there are some companies that are very selective with their partnerships, and that can help slingshot. And you have a company that is talking about you in rooms and it's at levels that you're really going to struggle to access as an early stage startup.
So you had talked before about peer validation, testimonials. You're talking about leveraging existing relationships. If your VC has a relationship, and then that is the time to absolutely leverage that. So you talked about the challenges of starting out with zero reputation in the marketplace. The way that I'm hearing you talk about it is you're not digging yourself out of a hole, right? You're just starting. Every startup, especially in the SaaS world, has something that a lot of enterprise companies don't have, some competitive advantage on a technology.
Frankly, they wouldn't exist. They wouldn't be funded. They
Right.
wouldn't be able to acquire customers. So I agree that the most exciting thing and the reason that I love startups is that you are doing something different. The reason to join is because you believe in it. There's plenty of things that are successful that I don't completely get or I wouldn't be very good at. But if you believe in it, man, that's going to show through to everybody that you talk to,
Right.
prospects, et cetera, et cetera. That is the exciting thing is that from ground zero, you're not digging yourself out. You are saying, hey, what are we all about? And you have to be able to deliver on that. But if the team believes, that's the fun part. That's why I like doing startups.
And I think that's the magic between leveraging the existing relationships in your sphere or area of influence. Because as SaaS founders being one, it was like the mentality is always there. As soon as people just know, the floodgates are going to start to open. What we can do, unbelievable, right? The passion and everything. And we realized very quickly on that it takes more than that. So when you're consulting, how are you at now year 5 in terms of a growth plan? And I'm not asking you to deal anything proprietary or anything, but I'm sure you've been leveraging the crap out of the relationships that you've already had, the new to the market. Wow, look what we can do. What point, where do the fundamentals kick in? Where does the scale kick in? Where's the phase 2 of growth for an early stage startup?
There's a few things in there. I think there's tactics on what to do, but then I think I also heard you say is like, all right, when do I start to hire more people? Which is really how we scale. I can do so much, but if I get 4 people doing what I can do, then okay, we've managed to triple or quadruple the company. I think first and foremost, you got to prove your thesis. You got to get your first 10 customers. And then I think you have to understand that like, are these all in the same ICP? Did I get a mixed bag because I was open-minded in trying a lot of things? Which are the ones that are most likely to be beneficial for the customer? These customers are struggling. Why is that? Is that because of their industry or their size, or is it an individual operator? So taking a sober look at that, if you've got a salesperson and they're hitting a quota, and I think a quota has to mean something more than just a number, right? It has to be something that's between 3 and 5x their on target earnings so that you actually have a real quota. And then you can start to hire more salespeople. If that person's achieving that legitimately, then that means then you can scale. You have something that is semi-scalable. Still a lot of unanswered questions, but I think a single person who is able to achieve quota on a quarterly or ideally annual basis, I think it's difficult to think that you're just going to hire 4 people and they're all going to figure it out, if that makes sense.
Tell me how much truth is in this statement. That second phase of growth, where you've done the trial and error and you've got maybe that mixed bag of clients, but you're looking at the ones that actually are at the core and you're retaining and you're growing and you're like, hey, I think we finally got our ICP. How much in that second phase then is really digging in on that ICP, really understanding who they are, the broader challenges and market that they're playing in? You provide a very important role in meeting the challenges of their job in total. But the trusted advisor, the company that's an expert that is consulting with their clients, gets them and everything that is going to help make them more successful, even if it's the parts that we don't even play in. So that's the difference between a vendor and a partner. How important is understanding that ICP at that second stage of growth and scaling where you think you've started to nail it?
Well, I sort of see that as just selling, whether that's consultative selling. I think it's really understanding your buyers and their industries and what are they dealing with. I know what I want to do, which is ideally have you achieve this thing with my product and hopefully pay for it. But what are you guys dealing with? And why is this going to be a good fit for you? Am I reading the room correctly? I think a lot of people think about ICPs as industry or as employer revenue segments or as geographies, and they're all correct. But are they all alike? Does that make sense? I think there is a lot of wisdom in finding a group of like companies because they often do struggle with the same struggle and benefit from the same macro conditions. But we have to understand that two vendors, they're in the same category, are not alike, as we all know, for a myriad of reasons. But real consultative selling is taking the time to not only just understand the industries that those people are dealing with, but what are the macro conditions? What is unique to this specific company before I even ring their doorbell? What do I need to know about them to make them feel like they can trust me and that I understand what they are going through? I think it's huge, and I think it's ongoing. The thesis is around segments exist for a reason because that is how we scale. But in sales, it is very hand to hand, and I think it always will be. No amount of automation or anything is ever really going to replace that to be very good at this.
One of the reasons, quite frankly, that I was asking the question is literally earlier this week, I had a podcast with an early stage expert CMO. Usually, when you bring a CMO into that second stage of growth, you've gotten past that early round of clients. And she was saying, as much as they're interviewing me, I'm interviewing them because I ask a number of questions of each and every one of them to understand, is there cohesion? Is there a single plan? And one of the biggest questions she asks is, who's your ICP? And then listens to the answers from the CRO, the CEO, the head of sales, and so on. She said it's just mind boggling the different definitions that exist within an early stage startup, which is early stage, but maybe that second stage of growth. So she just identified that as a massive problem.
Selling to some large companies in my day, it's not a startup problem exclusively, pretty comprehensively in any company. It shouldn't exist in startups, though. I think you're right. I think this is a good tip for something that we talked about earlier when you're thinking about, should I go to work here? Does everybody agree on the basics? What are we doing here? What's our goals? Why do we exist? And if everybody agrees, to your point, I think the later stage CMO is like, all right, are we all talking about the same thing and thinking about the same thing for the right reasons? That's a good sign. And I think that it is actually one of the competitive advantages that startups have. So that should be exploited as much as it can.
So I want to ask the question, what haven't we talked about that you want to make sure that before we end the podcast, we're talking about successful early stage CROs, just successful early stage SaaS companies, really. What haven't we covered that you want to make sure that we all understand?
What I think is important is that it's not just one function. It's not just sales doing a heroic deal or product shipping a miracle feature or marketing running a great campaign. It is everything for it all to work. I think that any one of those things can happen at startups, but if all of those things are happening, I think there's a chance to be doing really something special. All of those things that I kind of just described, the great campaign, the great feature, the miracle deal, whatever, are all freaking hard and take a lot of work. So I think nobody should ever underestimate the ease of things. Any successes that I've had in my career, it's easy to look back and be like, oh yeah, we did that. That means we can do it again. And it's easy for our brains, I think, to forget just the amount of work that goes into these things. So don't ever forget that or think that I get to skip a step or not do the dirty work or the manual work, I should say, to achieve the results that we're trying to get.
I love it. That's just the reminder. Because as soon as people start to know, we're just going to explode. We're going to be the next
Yeah,
accelerate, right?
I'll have to work hard. I won't have to work as hard. In my experience too with successful companies, the more successful we were, the harder things got. I don't really have a clean answer for why that is, other than obviously targets get bigger, but you start to get on competitive radars, right? Like you're invisible, and then all of a sudden you have 200 customers, and there's a competitor that might actually start taking you seriously, and that can be painful. So stuff, it changes all the time.
That's what keeps it interesting, right? Well, hey, Scott, thank you so much for coming on here. Would it be appropriate, because I know people are going to have questions, if we gave out a link to your profile on LinkedIn, so if people wanted to reach out?
Love it. Yeah. Even if it's just to talk shop, or obviously if anybody wants to talk to me about Syncari, I'd love that. But if anybody just wants to talk sales shop, I love to dork out on this stuff. So
All right. Well, fantastic. Thank you very much for coming on and sharing all these insights, or maybe we should just call them the war stories. I don't know, but thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
thank you for having me.